Good afternoon, everybody. Today we have a very important event, and that will take us to some kind of prognosis. We will discuss the possible expectations of the coming visit of the Indian Prime Minister Narendra Modi. He's expected to visit Ukraine, especially Kyiv, on August 23rd. Although it's not officially announced, experts got together today to discuss the possible expectations. We wouldn't be overstretching ourselves, but I'm very, very happy to introduce the panel today. That, is Vadim Halaychuk is a member of the Verkhovna Rada of Ukraine, he's a parliamentarian member, and he's also the first deputy chairperson of the Standing Committee on Integration of Ukraine into the EU and co-chair of the parliamentary group on Committee on Ukraine-EU Association. He's also a member of the group on interparliamentary relations with India. And he has visited India, and as well, he is very much, knowing and in many events of the Indian diaspora and other official governmental organizations is also a regular participant. Our next speaker will be Dr. Swasti Rao. She's a fellow of the Manohar Parrikar Institute for Defense Studies and Analysis. It's a very, very important think tank under the tutelage of the Ministry of Defense of India. And her research interests are very interesting, and she's a geopolitical expert as announced by the G20 summit in 2023. And she is widely published, and she's also a commentator on different media. And we have sent out a press pre-release where you can find the bio profile of everyone. So we welcome Dr. Swasti Rao to our event. And we also have Dr. Anastasia Pilyavsky, who's the reader in social anthropology and politics at the India Institute of King's College London. And she switches between UK and Ukraine. At present, she's in Ukraine, and that allows her to come, to our discussion, for which we are very honored. And she is a very prolific researcher on the Indian politics and Indian, she has authored a lot of works, and she's also the author of Nobody's People. It's published by the Stanford University Press, and also editor of Patronage's Politics in South Asia. Our very dear next speaker is Dr. Olena Bodilovska. She is currently the head of the Department of New Challenges of the National Institute for Strategic Studies of Kyiv. It's a governmental topical policy research institution under the Security Council and the Office of the President of Ukraine. We are very honored to have you, Dr. Bodilovska. And she's also teaching for many years, and she had also her diplomatic assignment in South Asia for several years. So she has both an academic affiliation and also a state foreign policy affiliation. So she has widely traveled, and she also has participated in a lot of conferences and, of course, research. She taught international relations for many years at the Institute and is also still attached to the Kyiv University. And then you have me moderating the whole thing. I'm the board chair of the EEDI. I currently teach international relations and diplomacy at the National University of Kyiv Mohila Academy. And I'm also related to a lot of other different projects, so I would not waste the time. And I would like to invite our good friend, Mr. Vadim Halaychuk, to have the opening address to us and start our seminar, please.
Thank you, Di Mridula. Thank you for inviting me to this event. It's always honor and pleasure to participate in these events, and we had quite a few in the past few months, few years. I must say, very efficient cooperation, and thank you for being the leader on these efforts. We definitely realize the importance and the symbolism of this visit. And symbolism is very important in global politics, as we all understand. This is the first one since Ukraine has gained independence, the first one in many, many years, as a matter of fact, visit of India's prime minister to Ukraine. And of course, since it's happening when Ukraine is at war, the Russian war of aggression against Ukraine, which stirred up uh, a lot of events and has very serious potential to stir up more events globally because of what has happened. The global order, the rules based order, have been violated. The UN Charter and different institutions which were created to prevent this particular conflict uh, did not succeed. Therefore, we obviously have a situation where the whole world needs to get involved and start very serious discussion on what do we do to restore the global order based on rules. And definitely India, the biggest democracy in the world, India, which has very important role globally, which has even more important role in the Indo-Pacific region, which is also, as we understand, key region for security in the world because of the strategic stance that the US and China are taking in this region. So India's position is extremely important in this. Therefore, the visit, although a very short one, though we don't comment publicly on plans and whereabouts, we do understand that there will be not much time, but a lot of important discussions will be taking place. And of course, it is important for us to learn more about India's internal politics, position, the situation in the region. The recent developments in the region uh, also call for more attention to what's happening and what are the reasons for those events that are developing now in the region. Uh, India's position mainly on the peace efforts. Uh, we have insisted that the formula that President Zelensky has proposed, the 10-point peace formula, is the true way out of, of this war, of this situation. Uh, India has not supported in full the formula, although has been participating in all the events which were called to uh, discuss the formula, to clear up positions of different countries, of different players on the formula, and participated in those events and at a certain level on the first uh, peace summit, which we hope will lead to further uh, further events aimed at achieving positions on making peace. Uh, we therefore also very interested to understand what priorities India has now here in this region. In Ukraine, we have good economic cooperation. Some of our experts, agricultural experts, are very important and very significant to India. Therefore, there are things to discuss there. Um, and other other areas of cooperation that are very very important. Uh, Back in 2022, in September, uh, Honorable Prime Minister Modi uh, has said a famous phrase that this is not an era for war, which was picked up and still is actively uh, actively used to demonstrate India's position, which is very clear, the India against the war, However, we do understand that we need more explanation as to what should be further steps to achieve this goal, to end this war. War is definitely not the way to resolve problems, as we can see. In fact, it's just the opposite. As war continues, problems multiply, new problems come up, and therefore any efforts directed at achieving common positions on making peace are very important. Therefore, I would say that would be our main expectation, to hear more about India's position, to get better understanding of what instruments India can use to push Russia, the aggressor, towards being more serious about negotiating peace, to have the influence, or to use the influence that India definitely has in the region, to help other countries and other politicians to understand the situation in Ukraine better and to understand Ukraine's position better. For me as a parliamentarian, it is also very important to learn more about India's internal policies and politics, India's external foreign policies and politics. With the new parliament elected, we also hope that that would be more contact, that would be more parliamentary diplomacy, more contacts, which will definitely help us to clarify our position, to help our fellow parliamentarians in India, the representatives of the people, to gain better understanding and help us understand what it is that we need to do to provide more information, better information to people in India, to understand that, as unfortunate as it is, the position that is quite popular in India, that Russia has somehow been forced to wage this war, has somehow been provoked, is not how things are in reality. So therefore, we would be very interested to have any more discussions, any contacts which would help us to promote these goals, which would help us to deliver the information that we have, that we believe would be useful for our Indian friends to make good on this promise that India will use its position, that India will use its experience to make the peace efforts more effective, more efficient, and the next discussions, the next summits will be with India's participation and India's assistance more efficient in achieving this goal. That would be it from me for the introduction, and we'll be happy to get involved in the discussion. And thank you, Mridula. This is very important that we're doing this.
Thank you, Mr. Halachuk. It's a very good beginning. I think India can play a role, but however, India's role, the global role that is envisaged today, is more on as a leader of the global South, it says it poses, but at the same time, yes, in relation to Ukraine, its stance probably has changed over the past 2.5 years. And the question is, will there be a change in India's stand, after the visit of Prime Minister Modi? And for that, we need to analyze the current status of relations and certain, possible problem areas. So I would like Dr. Bodilovska to shortly present her views from the Ukrainian standpoint as one of the topical experts in this field. So please, you're welcome. Please, Dr. Bodilovska.
Thank you so much, dear friends and colleagues. Let me start, first of all, with the appreciation of what my dear friend Mridula did, and with many, many thanks to Indian diaspora as a whole, because these people, They are here with us. No one from Indian diaspora left Ukraine during this full-scale war, and we appreciate a lot all these efforts which they actually made, because many of them not only stay with us, they saved our people. They gave them the shelter, they gave them the food, they saved our people from hunger during the first weeks of the invasion. So my first words are going to my Indian friends here in Ukraine, first of all. And also, I would like to share some of my personal feelings, if I may, because I started to promote India-Ukraine relationship almost from the very beginning of Ukrainian independence. And it became possible actually only when Ukraine became an independent country. Because I had an interest in Indian culture, history since my school years. But to do seriously any research in Indology, it all became possible only when Ukraine became an independent country, when the Embassy of India started their job here, and our embassy also in Delhi. With the help of the embassy with Indian diaspora, right now we have a huge number of people in Ukraine who are not only interested in Indian culture, but do it professionally. And even me, I have both my dissertation dedicated to India, one to the history of India, about the times of Emperor Harshavardhan, 7th century. And the second one was about the foreign policy of India in political sciences. But also I have a lot of my colleagues who made deep research during the independence about, for example, Bhakti movement, about translation from Hindi or Sanskrit into Ukrainian, about the foreign policy of India, many others. We have specialists on Indian philosophy, on Indian dance, on Indian literature, whatever. Not a huge number of people, but still quite enough to tell you that we have our own school of Indology. We managed to restore it because we had it previously, not even in the Soviet time. It was 19th century when we started the translation from Sanskrit to Ukrainian, for example, but not everyone knows about it. So now we managed to restore all these things, but along with this professional interest, we have really a huge number of people who love Indian culture, who experience their own traveling to India, pilgrimage. They do everything. I can mention almost every field, like yoga, Ayurveda, just traveling, then of course Indian philosophy, Hindu Dharma, Buddhism, whatever. And really, India became a favorite among Ukrainians, truly, because people in Ukraine love this culture. And then let me go to some not that much pleasant points, which are also important. Because of this huge attention Ukrainians and love Ukrainians gave to Indian culture, when the war started in March, actually 2014, I would like to mention, with the annexation of Crimea, the first disappointment came also because people here in Ukraine were very upset with a very cool and very short reaction of those times Prime Minister of India, Manmohan Singh, March 5th, 2014. It was a short statement about respect of international norms and the sovereignty of the state, but India continued the relationship with Russia. There was nothing like some, words of wonder or something like this. It was business with Crimea also. And it was a disappointment for me, for my colleagues, for Indian diaspora actually here. And we tried to do something to change this opinion. Actually, personally, I sent an open letter to the academic community in India, where I tried to explain why Crimea is not Russian, why it is the fact of aggression, and many other things. It was a time when the collaboration still we can keep somehow. And we have some discussion with my colleagues also. I went to India with a course of lectures in 2018 about the foreign policy of Ukraine, about the situation, about Russia-Ukraine confrontation. But then came 2022, February 24, when the full-scale, absolutely unprovoked, full-scale invasion started. And this time and this moment has changed our lives dramatically. But also it damaged India-Ukraine relationship, I would say, unfortunately, very unfortunately. But many people, this time, they were really seriously disappointed how it is possible that India, which we love that much, which we believe is the motherland of ahimsa, satyagraha, and non-violence, tolerance, and other things, why India did not support Ukraine, why India did not condemn Russia. And it was quite big discussion in the society what to do with all this. Even I would say I have some friends who stopped visiting Indian embassy, some Indian functions because of that. They really seriously believe that India supports Russia. And what I am doing for the last 2 years, actually, I am trying to explain what kind of the foreign policy India has, what neutrality means, and why it is not only, as many people believe, not very moral conduct, but it is also a window for opportunities, not only for Russia, but for Ukraine as well. Why India has these special ties with Russia. I did a lot of comments and published some papers, and I made my appearance in many media with this aim to explain Ukrainians why India is not that much pro-Russian, if even it is not very much pro-Ukrainian, because it is pro-Indian. And I started to explain what is the Indian interest is, and I even guessed that I had some success in this professional activity. But then the last point I would like to mention today, what happened? It was July 8th, visit of His Excellency Prime Minister of India, Narendra Modi, to Moscow. All these hugs with Putin, who is a criminal, we believe, and all these discussions. And this visit happened especially in the day when Russian attacked Kyiv with a very massive missile attack. But the most sensitive thing is that it was the attack on the most famous clinical children's hospital in Kyiv. Everyone who lives here knows very well what kind of clinic is that, and every family actually visited this clinic at least once. The same with me. I visited it with my son, with my daughter, with my granddaughter, and we know that it is a very special one because they treat children from the very beginning, newborns up to the 15, 16 years with very serious diseases. And when they shoot this clinic, I was at my job, and it is not very far from my place. I can hear all the sounds, and then half of the day, I can hear the sounds of emergency because it was a lot of children there, a lot of people. Many people started to come and help. And actually, among these people, we have students from India who are students here in Ukrainian Medical University, and we appreciate it a lot. And please try to understand, my dear Indian friends, how it can hurt us. We are very tired with this war, frankly speaking. Even today, last night, we could not sleep again here in Kyiv and the region. We can hear all the sounds of another attack in Kyiv. And it is more than 2 years. We experience all this horror. It's a huge tragedy for every one of us because everyone already lost someone at this war. Our relatives, our friends, my former students, unfortunately. And for us, it was really very sensitive when we see His Excellency Narendra Modi with these hugs in Putin's residence. We know that the next day something happened, and these negotiations in Moscow has been cancelled, the final step of these negotiations. And now I would like just in a few words to say that why this visit of Narendra Modi to Kyiv is very much anticipated. We are really expecting his coming because of what happened in the 8th of July, because of our love to India, because of our Indian diaspora here. And for me, the biggest expectation is that Prime Minister will come and can see my country. If he can see our bravery, our intention to combat Russians because we are fighting for our independence, and if he can come and see how we are tolerant, actually, he will understand that Ukraine never planned this war. We never wanted this war. We actually never wanted any war because, again, of our principles of the foreign policy conduct. We never planned the war with the nuclear neighbor, the huge one. And then maybe, I hope so, he can understand that it is our war for independence. And that is why it is not a place for the negotiations on the same level, because we are victims and Russia is aggressor. And we are fighting for our country to be, for us people to be, for our children, for our future. And I would like him to come and see all this. This is my expectation. Thank you for the invitation once again, dear Mridula. You're muted.
Thank you so much for this short and very succinct expression. I would like to draw the attention of all of you, the speakers, the panelists, to the chat. From time to time, just take a look. People are already asking questions. So I think we will gear up for the discussion. But for the moment, dear participants, all of you, please wait for your questions to be answered after the panelists have spoken. This is one I want to just make a request because, you know, panelists have a view to express and then you ask them questions. They haven't yet said. And I could see panelists being addressed with very specific questions. And that may make their task easy to already answer your question. Could be, you know, so. Given the fact that this is a visit which draws its beginnings from a day which was soaked in blood, as I say, tear and blood. So it's a very tragic moment for the Ukrainian nation. And yes, we spend endlessly, we spend sleepless nights, every night almost. We do not sleep for all this time. You know, honestly, people might get surprised that what happens, you know, how do you maintain, how do you manage? Well, we compensate, we manage, we breathe the oxygen, we have the solidarity, we have the warmth of people. So it's a very different scenario to understand why this resilience, where from we get strength for this resilience. And I say we, I don't make any difference between Ukrainians and foreigners, including Indians. So this is a very, very interesting factor that will be analyzed and researched for years, I believe, by specialists. Now, I would like to think of where does India stand today? India's policies have shifted, definitely. We have seen India opening embassies in the Baltics, which was not there before. You know, just a year before, we had no embassies for all these years. Moldova still doesn't have an embassy. Moldova, there's a concurrent accreditation by the ambassador who's in Romania. Establishing embassies doesn't per se say that India is changing, but it does definitely to have an infrastructure, to have everything. So there are possible shifts. India has concluded a free trade treaty with, recently it was with Liechtenstein, with Norway, with Iceland, and I believe with also Denmark, if I'm not mistaken. Iceland, sorry. So there is a lot of, you know, space that, you know, and the negotiation with the EU, I believe, is going on, the free trade treaty. So the volume of trade, relationship, people-to-people relation with the European Union and with the United States, Canada, Australia, basically the G7 countries is much more than what we have with Russia. With Russia, it is more state-to-state level and limited to certain sectors. despite the fact that a lot of our policymakers, they would always say about the historical relationship. I will tell you about that when I present, because I had an argument in the morning with someone today. So I would like Dr. Swasti Rao, who is a very focused expert on these areas, to just mention, how do you see India's strategic priorities and the possible, upcoming visit, and where will it take us? It's difficult to make a crystal ball gazing, but I do believe you have some expectations from your point of view. Please, Dr. Rao, the floor is yours.
Okay, thank you so much. I hope I'm audible and visible to everybody. And first of all, thank you so much. Bahut bahut dhanyavad to Professor Mridula Ghosh, who has been this, how do I say? I mean, she is an inspiration in so many ways. I remember asking her once as to from where does she draw the courage to actually stay on when there is, this war raging, etc. And she said that, but why should I leave? Because all my friends are here, all the Ukrainians are here, the Indians are here. And that's such an inspiration, Professor Ghosh. So, of course, thank you. It's an honor to join you. It's always great to hear, dear Olena's understanding of Indology, and I've heard her at different platforms. Mr. Vadim Halaichuk has always been very clear and concise, and I'm looking forward to listening to Anastasia as well. But before spending, without spending too much time, I will just come to what I have been asked to present today. Before that, let me just give a bit of a disclaimer that it is a Sunday and I'm at home, and you will keep hearing these aeroplanes going above. So I'll try to speak loudly because I stay very close to the airport, and this could be a bit of a dampener. So anyway, I'll speak very loudly. So, and in case there's something that you wish to ask me later, of course, there's a question answer session. So, well, right now, I will come to India's priorities. As we all know that between Prime Minister Modi's Moscow visit and now the situation has also changed on the battlefield. There has been the Kursk incursion, and which has really been very unexpected. Nobody saw it coming. I'm sure not a lot of Western partners of Ukraine knew about it either. So, right now that Ukraine is going to be negotiating from a position of relative strength compared to where it was before the Kursk, invasion of Russia. So this is not going to be on Kursk and how I made sense of Kursk, but this is going to be on how I look at the strategic priorities for India and Ukraine, and what expectations to have from Prime Minister Modi's visit. Now, before I come to Prime Minister Modi's visit, yes, analytically, let me just establish at the outset that I think what India has been doing, if you carefully see how India's approach has been evolving, and I will speak about that as well, is that there has been a process to de-hyphenate Ukraine from Russia. Now, obviously, here everybody knows, Olena also spoke about it, that India has had a historic, relationship with Russia. Of course, even there, a lot of things can be argued. For example, why is it that everybody speaks of what happened in 1971, but then there is also history in 1962? So a lot of times you would see that depending upon which side of the story you're looking at, people would argue more about what happened 71 and how Russia became important after Soviet Union became important after 71. Whereas in 62, when India faced defeat at the hands of China, the Soviet Union did not support India, against the Communist Party of China. Now, despite that, I think 1971 offers a very important turning point, and Russia has been a key partner. But what we need to remember, and I think India's, so to say, realization of that is also growing by the day, which is a very commonsensical observation in international politics generally, is that countries favor other countries as long as it favor the national interest and their geopolitics. So I think that's the same thing applies in the case of Russia. I would not go too much into the details because I guess the audience here are fairly educated. But for sure that when you speak about India's relation to Ukraine, I think mostly it has been through the eyes of India-Russia bilateral ties. Okay. And that particular thing has been changing happening ever since the war in Ukraine started. There is a huge debate in India about, what should India's Russia policy be? What should India's West policy be? And of course, there is a government policy, and the government the government talks about strategic autonomy, but at the same time, there are detractors that would keep saying that either the government is tilting too much in the favor of the West or too much in the favor of Russia, and all this keeps happening. But what I wish to underscore here is that we need to sort of change this foreign policy lens, de-hyphenate Ukraine from Russia to actually understand what is happening in Ukraine, what kind of opportunities does it open for Indian engagement with Ukraine and with the European security architecture at large, etc. And the other thing that I wish to also mention is that because of this war, why our foreign policy lens has been changing is because of the strategic alignment and deepening of the strategic alignment between Russia and China, which is pretty much a writing on the wall. So then again, on the matter of China and Russia, there are camps in India. One would say that, okay, this doesn't matter. Russia would not really go against Indian interest. The other camp would say, perhaps, no, the ship has sailed. And the way Russia and China are deeply aligned, it would have strategic implications for India. I would say that India's strategic autonomy should be rooted in strategic realism. And of course, there is no way under the sun that we would not be studying the Russia-China strategic, deepening. Now, this is one part of the introduction that I wanted to give. Now, the second is about India's position of neutrality. Now, as has been noted by many observers and commentators, India's position, which is the neutral position, actually has been evolving, because I think Olena put it very well that India is not pro-Russia or pro-Ukraine. India is pro-India. And if you look at it from this perspective, because the foreign policy, so to say, objectives sometimes keep changing, because, the world order is so much into flux, you will see that India's position with respect to neutrality has also been evolving in its own way. Now, officially, of course, we are absolutely neutral. And this meaning of neutrality has also been under scrutiny. But in a different paper, I've argued that how this is a very constructivist thing, and India has been attaching its own meaning of this neutrality, etc. So, well, for now, we can say that, India has been balancing its ties with the West on the one hand, which have been very unprecedentedly growing in the last few years, and with Russia on the other hand, because India has a historic relationship. But at the same time, India is also de-hyphenating, its relationship with Ukraine from its relationship with Russia, which is very important, and I will tell you how. Now, with respect to the paper today, I mean, my remarks today, I think I would give you a kind of a 360-degree view of what India's strategic priorities are. The first one I called political, and the political one is, of course, to do with neutrality. I just told you that India's neutrality is an evolving concept. And from this particular neutrality, one can deduce what is India's approach to mediation. And one of the things that India takes a lot of pride in is in being a mediatory power, or in being a mediator. And I will return to it. The second part of this 360-degree view is, of course, on humanitarian aid and reconstruction, all the investment opportunities for the private sector. I'm very happy to see that Professor Gulshan Sachdeva is a discussant, for today's session, because he has just very recently wrote a very good report on what are the humanitarian and reconstruction opportunities for India. So, of course, anybody who wants to take a deeper look at that, one can take a look at that, but I will come to this also in a while. And the third part of this 360-degree view, in my opinion, is definitely defense. Now, we all know that before the war started, when there was an Aero India 2021, an 80-member team from Ukraine had come to India. They had signed agreements worth more than $70 million US dollars. And Ukraine was, I think, all set to emerge as one of the key partners in India's defense diversification, right? As you know, I mean, I don't know, for the uninitiated, India is already in the process of diversifying its defense imports from a single source to other source, and also make in India, so I'm willing to take questions on that. So at that time, there was an upgrade of the AN-32 aircraft, which was underway. Ukraine had also pitched for India's medium transport aircraft tender, and Ukraine had offered its N-178 aircraft, the medium transport aircraft. Plus, of course, there has been a lot of dependence on the gas turbine engines from Ukraine, and, it powers a lot of our naval vessels, etc. Now, Right now, after the war, of course, this has changed because a lot of it has not been able to take off. Right now, the more important thing for India is to actually study how the Ukrainians have been evolving their drone program, and especially the FPV drones, that can be served both as attack and reconnaissance. The sea drones, the Magura V5 drones, of course, which have completely tilted the power equation in the Black Sea region, and the AI-enabled drones, because whatever we know that Ukraine perhaps is the only country that has deployed certain AI-enabled drones for the first ever time in the history of human warfare. And of course, related to that is anti-drone systems and radars. In fact, if I should tell you that I was recently at an event conducted by the Indian Air Force, where they wanted to understand the key lessons for India from the Russia-Ukraine war. And my lecture was on how the drone warfare has completely changed the battlefield and how India should actually be sending study groups, to actually understand this better. Now, coming back, these are the three main things that I'll be talking about with whatever time is left. And the first thing I already said is about the political neutrality. Now, very quickly, not a lot of people understand, and this is especially for the Ukrainian audiences, that while there is a lot of importance given and a lot of, I would say, even officially there is a lot of record kept and there's a lot of discussion happening on how India has been maintaining its ties with Russia, which is true. But then there is also another, factor which is not really taken into account, which is that exactly how many times have the Indian and the Ukrainian side interacted, for example. And Tanvi Madan has actually put together a list, and she put together a list. I saw that and I said, it's a great list. And then I added my own things to that list, and we recorded. I mean, after her list, I'm willing to share the link with you for all of you to see. But then about 40 to 42 times there have been recorded interactions between the Indian and the Ukrainian side. And these are all officially recorded interactions, okay? So starting from the 25th of February, 2022, which was merely a phone call between, our External Affairs Minister, Dr. Jaishankar, and between Minister Kuleba, to 23rd August 2024, when it is very likely that Prime Minister Modi is himself going to Ukraine, there are more than 40 times that there have been recorded interactions, from phone calls at NSA level, the foreign minister level, of course, at different sidelines between Prime Minister Modi and President Zelensky, the deputy foreign ministers of Ukraine coming to India, Minister Kuleba coming to India. This is something which is very interesting, and this is something which is really not given too much attention, because this also shows and strengthens how neutral India would like to remain in this particular war. Going further, I myself have been a part of at least 4 to 5 key developments, right? After the war has started. For example, the MOD issued an advisory for Indian students stranded in Ukraine. I, at MPIDSA, was a part of making this advisory. Then we made a PMO report for the war in Ukraine and how the war will end. And all of us were proven wrong, because we argued that probably the war will not go beyond 7 days or 10 days. And of course, today we are, well above 900 days, and the war is still going on. In fact, and the war is still having the surprise element, as we saw from the Kursk invasion. Then there was a deputy foreign minister's talk that I conducted at MPIDSA, Ukrainian foreign minister, deputy foreign minister. Then the second deputy foreign minister came again after a few months. And then Minister Dmytro Kuleba came to India, and there was a dinner where I attended, of course, and I had an opportunity to speak to him directly. So I think, politically speaking, we need to broaden this horizon, actually see what have been the number of times that they've been recorded interactions officially, and then what have been the outcomes of that. Now, if you remember, when I mentioned the 360-degree view, I said that from here you can deduce India's approach to mediation. And when mediation, I've worked a lot on this particular topic, and I've always argued that instead of trying to play a total mediation role, whereby trying to bring the war to an end, I think it would be more useful for India to get into limited mediation, where you identify certain areas and mediate around those specific issues, so that you can bring down the net suffering of the war. That's one part. The second part is that India's consistent participation in all the peace summits, right from Copenhagen to Jeddah to Malta to Switzerland, okay? Now, what is usually covered by the media is that, okay, India did not choose to sign on the peace, the joint declaration of the Switzerland summit. But what is usually missed by the media is that India's national security advisor was present at Jeddah when the working groups were formed to actually identify those issues around which India could mediate more in a meaningful manner. So I think these kind of things about how, how reconstruction is going to happen and what are the opportunities for investments, those kind of things should be highlighted by both sides, because that is where I think, that win-win situation, rests. Now, coming related to the mediation efforts, of course, is the humanitarian assistance. And there I already mentioned that Professor Gulshan Sachdeva has recently published a report. Please refer to it. But very quickly, even in his report and even in the other work that I've been doing on mediation and limited mediation and humanitarian assistance, I've been saying that, yes, you can see that India's development activities can be broadly divided into, a couple of categories. We give line of credits and there are capacity building programs. If you read Professor Sachdeva's reports, he goes into, a lot of details of exactly what kind of money have we given for the line of credits, etc. But what I want to focus here is that if you look at the line of credit, which is mainly given for infrastructure development, now India has more than 300 line of credits, signed with different countries in the world. And this is like a whole host of global south, I would say. Okay, depends on how you define the global south, but a whole host of global south, including with Russia, by the way. Now, that, of course, is one way in which India's association, when it comes to reconstruction of Ukraine, can probably go further. And the other is a very interesting phenomenon, which is called the triangular cooperation, which is when India joins hands with a Western partner to actually identify a developing country and then sort of go in a more joint, in a more joint fashion to sort of bring about that development. Okay, so even when it comes to triangular cooperation, I mean, India's engagement with the EU, with Germany, with France, they are well recorded. Part of it is also there in Professor Sachdeva's report. So please take a look. But what I really wish to underscore is that here is the mechanisms through which actually India can play a more visible role in the reconstruction of Ukraine. So far, we have sent about 16 consignments of humanitarian aid to the tune of about between 2 to 3 million, US dollars. But this by itself, I don't think is a big money. But what I wish to again underscore is that there are mechanisms which are available. And perhaps when Prime Minister Modi goes to Ukraine, if he goes to Ukraine, this would be an ideal situation, an ideal platform to discuss it at the level of heads of state. So I think this would really make a lot of difference. The other thing that can be mentioned very effectively is what is the role of Indian private sector's involvement in this rebuilding. And I think this is again something which is going to be embedded in the larger European, approach. So like I mentioned that there is a triangular cooperation. Okay, so in the same fashion, I think this particular thing can also be discussed, can be explored. Now, the last point of my 360-degree approach, okay, or the 360-degree strategic parameters or strategic priorities for India is definitely about the weapons. And here I want to mention a few things for you, which is that, for example, India is going to be focused more on collaborative security building initiatives. Okay, so I think that bit is interesting. And why do I say that is because I'll give you an example. Now, recently, you know that Prime Minister Modi is also going to Poland before he goes to Ukraine. And when he goes to Poland, I mean, I was in Poland last month for a international conference and with a lot of other Indian colleagues there. But I had an opportunity to actually go meet the Indian Defense Attaché, and he's a brigadier rank officer. And one of the things that he really focused on was that, okay, look at the opportunities that the war in Ukraine has given to India and Poland. And this is just an example, so think of it as a template, which is that India has been looking for the modernization of its T-72 tanks. And because Poland has donated and given all of its Soviet-era equipment to Ukraine, its assembly lines are actually lying vacant. And now Poland and India are going to be signing an agreement for modernizing India's T-72 tanks. So this is the way in which I wish to sort of somewhere focus that India can really make use of this particular situation. I mean, I don't mean to sound very, I mean, I don't mean to sound very cold to what is happening in Ukraine, but I'm trying to look at India's strategic priorities. And this is a situation that India needs to understand better. So, for example, there is very little understanding in India about how the Ukrainian defense industry and the European defense industry, for example, Rheinmetall, etc., have gotten into long-term agreements. Okay, and how is that going to evolve the European military landscape? Because in India and in the rest of the world, the European Union or the continent of Europe is not really looked upon as a military player, as a strategic player, right? It is looked upon as a geo-economic player. But one of the transformations that have happened or that have triggered, okay, they're still underway, so I would say that they're triggered in Europe, is that Europe is now in this massive transformation of emerging as a security actor and perhaps later a security provider. I'm not sure about that, but for sure, a security actor. And in that process, there are several opportunities that are opening. They would need a lot of defense industries to come and pitch in. And I think, of course, this is something that India can really look at very deeply. Please remember that India's defense diplomacy in Europe has also been a lot of transformation. We have opened new defense wings. Professor Ghosh mentioned about opening of new embassies. Of course, that's one. But apart from the embassies, we have also opened in 2022, we took the decision. And in 2023, we opened new defense wings in Poland, in Spain. And now we are also perhaps thinking of opening, having somebody at the the European Union level, and perhaps also in Greece. So these kind of things are very important to note, that India is willing to enter into this game of defense, not only diversifying its defense procurement, but also upping its defense exports. And because Europe is in a situation like this, India can really ramp up its defense production, and in multiple ways, depends on how much you sort of, which way you want to look at it. Now, this is perhaps something, important. Now, just to conclude, because I know I have taken a lot of time, I think when it comes to the official policy, India's official policy may not change, because like I said, that India's official policy of neutrality should be understood from the point of view of India's national interest. So India, that is perfectly fine. The thing is that India's multi-alignment should be substantiated, because I see that in the West itself, there is, while on the one hand, there has been a lot of criticism of why India has not stood up and criticized Russia for what it has done in Ukraine. But at the same time, there has been very little, discussion and very little deliberation on, for example, the kind of steps that the Indian MEA and the Indian Prime Minister, when they took to ensure that Indians do not end up in the Russian war. Because if you remember, on the June 11th, MEA actually issued a very strongly worded statement asking Russia to put a verified stop, okay, to inducting internationals by whatever way they were doing, to actually go and fight in the war in Ukraine. And then when Prime Minister Modi went there, he actually, this became one of the talking points. And then the Prime Minister's office and everyone, they tweeted that we have got this assurance from President Putin that Indians will not be inducted. So I think these are kind of things that they should, we should be focusing on if you want to build constructive relationship between India and Ukraine. Of course, apart from this, perhaps the last point is that we definitely need more events like this, because Ukraine doesn't really come in the Indian strategic imagination anymore. And I guess this is not right, because the way the war has been going on for the last 900 days, 900 plus days, and it is going to go on for at least maybe a year, a couple of years more, or maybe more, I don't know. Ukraine is definitely one of the most battle-hardened militaries of the world, and it is India's loss if India is not able to take lessons on the evolution of military strategy. So in a very, very purely military, aspect, I think it is in India's interest to actually engage the side of Ukraine. And in that, of course, all these kind of engagements, all the scholarly engagements, all the other talks, everything should be welcome. But with this understanding that India operates in India's national interest. Thank you so much.
Thank you enormously. It has been such an illuminating experience to have your views, especially on the defense sector. this is something that you explained to us, the 360 degree. You should be quoted more and more, and the like our ad for this event says that, we look at areas which are left in the dark. So your intervention has basically focused on those areas left in the dark. We have not seen them on the media. Definitely, Ukrainian media has to be enlightened, and the more you can speak to the Indian media from the Ukrainian side, and also from the Indian side to the Ukrainian media, it will help, because there are several stereotypes which need to be broken and need to be overcome. It's a very uphill battle for any politician like Narendra Modi in his own country, having a lot of things to deal with, and also at the same time exercise the priorities of national interest and foreign policy, and for which he has a very experienced team of, bureaucrats, a very big team, So I would like also to reflect on like, there is one side, the government policies. These are the very different details about mediation, about neutrality, about the weapons and defense sector, which is one of the most important things for any country's security. Nevertheless, also the basic drivers also are the internal forces. Like, we know or not, there are many sympathizers with Ukraine inside India. I mean, in the popular level, and coming from the hard sectors to the more soft sectors, like the mental map of the average Indian, to think of, for the why an average Indian would definitely like to be with Ukraine, because Ukraine is suffering and they see the news and everything, despite the fact that there is a very serious Russian propaganda. You will not disagree that that is also there in the public domain, not for experts, but for common people. So I would like Dr. Pilavsky now to highlight what can be those internal drivers that might be working, because as a researcher on India and deeply studying India, I think you can really throw light on those aspects which can really help in this case, which can be the drivers. Well, they might not be the agents of change related to this visit per se, but they will have an impact. Please, Dr. Pilavsky, your take.
Thank you very much. Dhanyavad, bahut shukriya. Mridula, so I think we need to understand, I would like to carry on with Swasti's note of realism that she's added to this, because to think that people in a very different place, a million miles away, most of whom have not been to Ukraine or don't know very much about it, will be very deeply sympathetic, is, I think, at best naive. For one, we need to remember that India is a continent. It's a continent very much like Europe, with lots of regions, with more than 120 registered languages, cultures, cuisines, literatures, and so on, with twice as many people living in it as in Europe. Its internal political world is extremely dense and extremely eventful. I have just completed a very exhausting ethnographic reporting on the 6-week-long elections. There's most of attention, as in many event-rich regions and countries, is focused on itself, is nationally bound. The way that most Americans are actually concerned with what's happening inside America, most Indians are actually concerned with what's happening inside India, and there's a lot going on, right? So, and apart from anything, I think we need to understand that understanding of European politics generally, and the events and relations between Russia and Ukraine in particular, are as vague and as poorly understood as political events are understood in, say, France or Britain about what's going on in Tamil Nadu or in Kerala, right? So as Mridula has just mentioned, we are up against something that's very significant, which is a long, Russia has unfortunately become the heir to the Soviet information machine, which was extremely active in India in the Soviet days. the Mitrokhin archives, which revealed KGB files, have shown the huge, that just in 1 year, 1972, I think, 3,500 articles were published by the KGB in Indian newspapers. India was obviously very important as a site of information campaigning by Soviet operatives because it's the biggest Anglophone sphere outside the West, right? Russia has inherited a lot of those channels. Off-record editors of Anglophone Indian newspapers I write for have all told me that every pro-Ukrainian piece that is published has to be mirrored by a pro-Russian piece, and those are the channels of diplomatic pressure that are actually in existence. I think that needs to be understood. So given just a very faint understanding of European politics, bewilderment about lots of things that have happened in European history, industrial scale extermination of human life is unthinkable in Indian history. It just never happened on that scale. People can't imagine it. People can't imagine the Holocaust in the same way they can't imagine what's going on in Ukraine. Of course, now the public perception has changed, and I'm surprised by how much, because the sheer scale of violence, the sheer cynicism of violence that Russia has meted against Ukraine has slowly started opening up, common people's eyes. Of course, the narratives of, Ukraine is really Russia, it's little Russia. The narrative of NATO made us do it. The narrative of Ukraine is, Russia's legitimate zone of influence. Two things like it's the Ukrainians who tried to kill Trump. That really is virulent in the press, and there's very little that Ukraine has to counter that. There are very few channels that we have. So that's something that we absolutely urgently need to work on. Our diplomacy in India has been in abandon. It's very much just beginning, and our information collaboration needs to start happening. I think a very promising starting point is Indians who are in the Indian diaspora in Ukraine, a lot of students who are living here, could convey what life is like in Ukraine, what Ukrainians are like, to counter, myths of Nazism in Ukraine, to counter the idea that Ukraine is somehow a kind of mini American puppet, and it's sort of an Americanoid cultural space as well, which of course it isn't. So just to start there, we need to understand that there is a natural kind of uninterest, ignorance, and apathy towards Ukraine. And a huge Russian informational influence that has a really long history. So to continue with this note of realism, which Swasti has very helpfully started, I would like to say that we need to think about Modi's visits both to Russia and now to Ukraine in terms of his own political situation that he finds himself in now. And he is, of course, thinking of national interest and people's opinions. India really has proven in this last round of national elections to be a serious democracy. Everybody thought that given that opposition to BJP and Modi is very, very weak, he would have another landslide. Well, simply because there's no other alternative, because actually India is very Russia-like. It's heading towards a totalitarian kind of model. And these elections, I think, have laid that myth absolutely to rest. So this was a very weak victory, which surprised almost every analyst and psephologist in town and out of town. Modi now needs to work very hard to build up support, which he lost. We need to remember that his party lost almost a third of their parliamentary seats. Modi has had to form a coalition for the first time ever in his political career. He hasn't had to form it as a chief minister of Gujarat, the state of Gujarat. He hasn't had to form it in the last 10 years. So if he is going to be vying, he's a very ambitious politician. He will be vying for a 4th term, which would be truly historic. He would be the first prime minister to hold 4 terms. He needs to appease the Indian electorate. And so we need to understand what went wrong in these elections, who voted against him, and whom he needs to appease. So first of all, it's the economy that has been his Achilles heel. On the one hand, on the macroeconomic sort of counts, he's done rather well. He has stabilized a banking crisis, which was looming. He has attracted a lot of investment. The Indian investment market is doing well. He's done a lot for India's infrastructure. But on the other hand, a lot of people, especially in the countryside, have suffered. His politics has been one that has disfavored small business, which is the backbone of India's economy. The small business sector has shrunk from 27% before Modi to 19% now. Household debt has gone up. Unemployment has soared. It's doubled since 2020, I think. It's gone up from 3.2% to 7.4%, something like that. The traditional BJP electorate has always been in the cities. It's a middle-class urban electorate, and Modi's internal economic, microeconomic policies have favored that electorate. So, for instance, the prices of onions have been curbed in order to help keep food prices low in the cities. And that has created extraordinary electoral outcomes where Maharashtra, which is the biggest onion producer in India, has voted against the BJP. And Maharashtra, everybody in the world thinks the BJP is the party of Hindu nationalists, and that is part of it. But Modi has always won his first two landslides into premiership, and now this weaker but still a victory, have been won on the promise of economic development and prosperity. And so what people want from him is roads and jobs and an increased income. In the heartland, in the mecca of Hindu nationalism in India, in Ayodhya, Modi's party lost. And in his own Holy of Holies, the Hindu Holy of Holies in Benares, which is his own constituency, he gained a lot fewer seats. So we need to remember Indians are voting on actual material benefits. They want Modi to improve their lives. They don't want identity politics, which a contingent of the BJP, of course, is for. But Modi knows that what he needs to do is he needs to improve the lives of the people who didn't vote against him. The people who didn't vote against him are what I would call the kulaks, the kulaks of India, the middling farmers who are suffering from a drought epidemic, which is brought on by global warming. Droughts are increasing, agricultural profits have fallen precipitously, and Modi needs to do something. Modi needs to improve their lot. So when Modi went to Moscow, and he and the Indian press worked really hard to present it as a peacekeeping mission, right? He's going to try to convince Putin that it was a really bad idea to attack Ukraine, and that he's not a nice guy to do that. It's not a nice thing to do. What he was actually doing, and I think we all know that, but I will take the job of saying that upon myself, is he was developing crude oil trade. I think the focus of the conversations were about developing maritime channels for sanction avoiding oil trade, for instance, between Vladivostok and Chennai. India's import of crude oil has gone up 20-fold, with India importing since 2021. India now imports more than 2 million barrels of crude a day at a highly discounted cost, which of course is a huge benefit to India. And following what Swasti said, we can't be upset with India about that. Modi is pursuing his own political interest. He's also pursuing his country's national interest. He is getting oil on the cheap. And we might think that this is an unprincipled thing to do, but in his position, in the position of a population which is one of the worst affected by global warming and droughts, it's a population, 70% of it still lives in the countryside. Agriculture is a chief source of income and livelihood for many people. It is difficult to blame him for that decision, right? So given that, there is the countryside electorate, the kulaks who have voted against Modi, suicide among whom has increased, who really are suffering a huge deal. There's also another electorate and another agenda that Modi has, to which he has been pitching. So one is bettering India's economics, bettering prosperity, improving India's lot. And he has really, to his credit, he has lifted huge numbers of people out of 500,000 have been lifted out of absolute poverty. That's why some of the poorest of India's population, including tribals, have voted for Modi. He has done very well. But it's this middle class of the rural population that has been left behind that he now needs to appease. But again, going back to the traditional historic BJP and Modi electorate, the urban middle class, as well as the huge Indian diaspora. What is really important to them and why they applaud Modi in many ways, in many respects, is his attempts, his genuine attempts to place India, to take it out of the shadows of a sort of large but kind of backwater in Asia, and to bring it into a position of being a global player and eventually a superpower. Modi's hosting the G20 summit for the first time, which was news about which, including the menu that was served, with regional cuisines sort of being displayed to attendees, was very, very widely discussed in the press. The moon landing were all meant to bring global attention to India. And of course, under Modi, India has overtaken the UK as the world's 5th largest economy. So its macroeconomic standing has improved substantially. But all of that is an image-making act, which is very important, not only for Modi personally. I believe that it really matters to him. That's his personal ambition, but it also matters to his key electorate, which wants to have India seen as a genuine global player, especially that now it's the most populous country in the world. It's overtaken China by population. But in order to do that, it's not enough to land on the moon. It's not enough to host G20. It's not enough to try to rebrand it from the colonial India to the Indian Bharat, which Modi has attempted to do. India needs to be seen to do something that affects affairs in the wider world. And I think this war really is an opportunity, a political opportunity for Modi to do something. And I think Swasti was right to say that negotiations that Modi can really affect don't have to be, Modi rewrites a peace deal and convince Zelensky and Putin to hug. But he can, for instance, help negotiate the return of some of Ukraine's children. That's something that would be very popular in India. It's a very sympathetic act. It's something that I think he's in a position to do. So in building India's role as a global actor, as a superpower, that would be really helpful to Modi and his image, and to the sense that, one thing that really struck me after, a few years of being away during COVID, I came back, I felt a genuine sense of national pride that a lot of what Modi has been doing has really instilled in a lot of very, everyday Indians, from, vegetable sellers to taxi drivers. And that is important. I mean, that's another thing that really inspires his electorate. Another thing that I think is ultimately of the key significance that Ukraine can provide, and here I'm afraid I'll repeat a little bit of what Swasti said, is that in order to be a superpower, a global player, India needs to play a bigger role in the Indo-Pacific. It needs to be a serious opponent to China. And given that China's defense budget is 3.5 times bigger, more than 3.5 times bigger than India's. It's got a lot more people, a lot more resources, a lot more of everything. Ukraine, being in that same asymmetrical position next to a vastly larger power, can absolutely provide India with crucial matters that aren't only going to help its army and its defense, but are also going to help its image, especially now that it's partnering increasingly with the United States, as America is turning towards China as its key strategic opponent. Over the last 10 years ago, the United States has named India its key strategic partner. And the focus, of course, is on the Indo-Pacific. So waterborne drones, the crucial thing is Ukraine has developed low-cost technologies on land, in air, in intelligence, but very crucially in the sea. And of course, India's fleet is much smaller than China. That's where India really loses out to China. And here Ukraine has invented new ways of conducting warfare. You know, Ukraine has no fleet of its own to speak of, to be honest. And it has beaten, I mean, that's Ukraine's biggest victory so far. And that's something that India can seriously profit from. So and that, again, we need to remember that it is India's interest that we need to be thinking about during Modi's visit. We can't hope that Modi and his electorate will simply sympathize with Ukraine and that will achieve anything. Yes, they sympathize. They are very sorry that our people are dying, but ultimately their lives matter more to them, and that's absolutely fine. What else did I want to say? Oh, there's one other area of cooperation and collaboration which I think India and Ukraine are particularly well positioned for, which is digital governance. So India, of course, has this enormous problem of, of democratic demography, right? Which is why it's been running elections for over 6 weeks, over 7 phases. India has been trying to deal with problems of demographic problems, and it's achieved. It's a pioneer in digital democracy, in digital elections. Electronic voting machines have been implemented in India. Actually, attempts started in the 1980s. It's the first to do so. And in fact, I think that could be helpful to Ukraine. Now, under conditions of warfare, digitizing the electoral process would be very welcome here. On the other hand, Ukraine has pioneered apps like DIA that allow for the management of ID documents, which are a big problem in India, persistent problem in India with a huge population. But ID documents and a variety of government documents issued to people can be helped to manage by Ukrainian software. So I think that really in both India and Ukraine have proven to be pioneers of digital governance, digital democracy. And I think I will end with that.
Thank you. That's always already a big baggage, big basket full of hopes and expectations, I believe. And then we will slowly probably move on to the Q&A. But let me just sum up and say a few words from my side. That is like, if we think of the Ukraine, I have been always telling about it, that one of the things that is very hard to determine, to quantify in terms of tangible benefits, in terms of a tangible, like, how many sectors, how many units, or even, what matters for the pockets of people. But from the historian's point of view and from the theoretical framework, as Swasti has mentioned about realism, and you did too, Swasti also mentioned constructivism in the point of, development cooperation and capacity building. I would like to balance both of that, and I would bring some historicism into this argument, that to position the whole view of, it will be a very difficult uphill task. I don't know when that can happen, and that might not happen in the midterm perspective, definitely, that to view the post-Soviet space as from a different angle, not as something that the big hegemon is Russia, and then everybody went away from Russia. It was not built like that. It was, in fact, how did Russia generate itself? How did Russia become Russia? Because I'm afraid that in studying Russia as specialists, I would just deviate a little bit, because from that, on that depends a lot of the perception on Ukraine we have, because everybody perceives Russia after 1917, the revolution. People very less reflect Russia pre-revolutionary, and what was Russia's deeds before the revolution? How was it? And so when people talk about these historic ties, I really have questions to the word history, because history is not just 50 years or 100 years. Indians understand history as 1,000 years, if not more. You know, we Indians do not care for history which happened just 100 years back. 100 years is just yesterday. So in that sense, if we think of the further, deeper history, the genesis of Russia, and now the modern scholars are finding it out, you know, how did it expand? It was an empire very much in the same style as, you know, China built its empire on the territorial expansion, not really the empire that the colonial West made. So from that point of view, but Russia definitely colonized many, many people. Who are today the different units of the Russian Federation? I have not seen much discussion on what is happening. I may miss something, but a very serious analysis of what is Russia, the internal composition of Russia, ethnographically and, you know, demographically and otherwise, and the different populations and how their grievances, what are their grievances and how they were occupied by basically the ethnic Russians. So that is something that is missing. And from there, you know, we have this very gray perception, very flat blanket perception that Russia, it's not all about ethnic Russians, ethnic white-skinned Russians. You know, it's about a very different, it's a federation. And we don't really know what is happening inside. Now, we do not understand, therefore, because of that, we do not understand the expansionist motives of Russia towards Ukraine. This is for the simple reason, you know, because there was an expansion to the southeast of Ukraine and Crimea. I often say that if Crimea is Russian, then India is British, because Russia entered Crimea in 1783, basically the same time British entered India. So, you know, these are the historical, I'm moving out of the other, you know, very tangible things. But once we look at the history of this region, of course, of East Europe, you know, if we even study a deeper study of East Europe, in terms of area studies, we have a very weak, I would say, very ideologized, very Sovietized Russia studies. You know, we need to de-Sovietize the Russia studies first in order to understand Ukrainian. Of course, we need Ukrainian studies, definitely. We need, you know, I don't know how Poland is looked into. How many area studies do we have on Poland, on East Europe? It's a matter to be dealt with by scholars of the future, but today we have to train up our students for that. You know? So I would think that, you know, Indian historians and Indian other social scientists must be thinking in these lines. But Modi's visit will not give result on this, you know, in this perspective. It will not be. But at the same time, a visit by a prime minister might trigger some understanding that if you go to these countries you must visit. And if we see after that, Mr. Modi visiting Baltics, Mr. Modi visiting the Southeast Europe, the Balkans and other places, it might try to open a new chapter, because this is terra incognita for many. Indians study West Europe very well. Indians study Britain very well, you know. I would say if we talk about historic ties, maybe Britain comes first than, you know, Russia in that sense. The history of this 1971, it's Soviet Union and India. It is not Russia again, because Ukraine was very much a part of it, and it's ignored and neglected today, which is something I would say it's a discrimination that is being faced. Open discrimination towards all the other republics that were existing. You know, it is not really healthy to talk about historical Russian ties when you didn't have Russia. There was no Russia before 1991. You know, this is something that needs to be addressed, of course, also on the policy level, also on the political level, because the rhetoric that comes out of the foreign ministry and of other analysts, it matters a lot, because it has given the tone and it is getting repeated, and this lie or myth is getting repeated and attaining the status of truth. And that is a block. You know, that is something that is blocking our understanding of all these other spaces. To talk about it, you know, I wouldn't say that this will, visits will trigger definitely. And of course, visits will trigger in the sense that he would realize that there are Indian diasporas all over the place, you know, and they have their understanding, because in the West, you know, the Indian diaspora matters a lot to Mr. Modi. And I believe the same should happen in these countries. So although the number is very less, but we do have a lot of people here, even now. I mean, people have returned and they are continuing to live with Ukrainians. Now, I wouldn't say much. I would love to answer questions. I think that my humble expectations are very few. One is Mr. Modi should look at the people. He must visit places. He must be able to see things for himself with the visual. The visuals sometimes matter much more than, if people talk. Even without talking, you can see things and you can make your conclusions. So that might happen. And of course, my personal opinion was that if he had been given a chance to speak to the parliament, not as a political statement, but at least to greet the people of Ukraine on the day of the national flag. This is just on the eve of Ukrainian independence. So that might be a very good symbol for him to also explain to his electorate at the end of the day that this is very, very important, that he's coming and addressing this country. So that will turn a page, definitely. And I'm not sure if that will completely ruin the relations with Russia. I don't think so. If it does, then I would say Russian diplomacy is very immature because, they must understand neutrality more. They must accept India's neutrality. That is another thing that Russia sometimes imposes its views. And many a time it is that as Russia says or does, it tallies, sometimes India's steps tallies with that of Russia. So that is why there is this perception in Ukraine that, India is pro-Russia. It emanates from certain superficial stuff, which is, as Swasti has pointed out. Okay, so let's move on to the discussions without me speaking more. I would ask, let us be fair. In order to be fair, we must look at the chat from the very first question. Okay, so we have the first question is, let me, because some people address me personally, those do not matter. Yeah, there is one, whether Parliament of Ukraine is organizing Mr. Modi's address to the session of Ukrainian Parliament. There is one person, but I cannot identify because there is some OQDT7Y. I don't know, you have asked. And I think Sahasranshu Dash has also asked 3 questions, if you may just look at it. In the recent joint Indo-Russian statement, yes, there's the war around Ukraine, which makes it implicit India's tentative acceptance of Russians. I would ask anyone to comment, but I do have an answer to this question specifically. And is there a possibility of Indo-Ukrainian collaboration on drone technology? And I think Dr. Rao has already answered. And in fact, in her presentation, she made it absolutely clear. Is it possible for Modi to be invited to make a speech? Again, this is something that is on the table, but we don't know. Now I see the question to Dr. Swasti Rao. How does the relationship between India and Ukraine fit into India's broader foreign policy, and especially with regard to its relations with Western countries and Russia and China? So I do believe certain reflections have been done by Dr. Rao, but more will be, better. And Dr. Rao, you have a lot of questions addressed to you. So will India take seriously about Ukraine? Talk seriously. Ability already proved on the battlefield. Its water drone, Neptune missiles, and other items as a modern day warfare equipment technology supplier and joint venture program. To some extent, this question was answered, but if you want to elaborate. And of course, Dmitro Shulga, you have asked very valid question with regard to the fact that the political element is with the very technical, technological cooperation of the defense that can you really have Ukraine will share it if you keep neutrality and keep military ties with Russia? Very valid question. I think that is there. And of course, now we have a comment from our speaker, Mr. Vadim Halaichuk, is the parliament. Everyone interested in knowing about the parliament, he cannot comment because the travel plans for security reasons. And of course, the RADA is happy to do that. So I believe the RADA has by now proposed to the protocols, who are working on the visit, and it depends on how much time they give and what happens, you know. So let us now just start with the questions. I would ask, another question is it possible to buy crude oil on cheap and support Ukraine? Russia needs to sell anyway. There is this, the crude issue is something that we will all comment probably. And also we have Malathi. She asked, the crude is, but this is for Anastasia, for you perhaps. The crude is for the urban middle class, is it not? It's not for the poor. So the peasants are not the users of fossil fuels. So this is a very important comment, and also that such a mystery that Indians and Indian intellectuals who have such strong anti-colonial understanding have such a reluctance to understand that Russia too was a colony and imperial power. Maybe I can elaborate a little bit at the last fag end of the discussion, but please start your interventions. I would ask Professor Dr. Swasti Rao to say, and then probably Anastasia, you speak about the oil thing. And I know Dr. Bodilovska will have also points to address. Please.
Thank you so much, Dr. Ghosh. I'll try to be as brief as possible because there've been so many questions directed to me. So very quickly about how does India balance its ties with Russia and then in the West, and what is about Ukraine? See, the first thing that we need to understand is that even with India's ties with Russia, usually there is a tendency, and you probably may have noticed, and a lot of people here may have noticed, is that a lot of times there's a tendency to argue as if India-Russia ties are etched in some kind of stone, right? That, oh, India has special ties. Oh, India has, it's something which is like out of the syllabus. And I find that approach very unprofessional, honestly, because this is not really how international politics is done in any serious discussion. These kind of things cannot be etched in stone, first of all. I think a lot of people should know that India was already mindful, and especially the current dispensation was extremely mindful of India's very risky dependence on Russia's weapons, which was very high for many, many decades. And the Indian defense modernization was already underway. Defense modernization and defense diversification was already underway. What happened with the war in Ukraine is that process got accelerated because there was a problem with respect to the supply lines. Like, for example, the S-400s, the remaining 2 consignments have not yet come. We ordered for 5. And then India has also not placed a single new order with Russia after 2021. This is also an important thing that everybody needs to register. And that is why I think when you say that how does everything fit into India's ties with the West and India's ties with Russia, and all of that, I think this particular thing needs to be kept in mind, is that there are several processes that were already underway. So that's the first thing. So we should keep that in mind. The second point I noticed was about India's position on annexed territories. That would there be a tacit kind of an agreement on the part of India? Somebody asked that question on the matter of Crimea and others. See, the first thing you need to understand is that officially India has always upheld the UN Charter and international law. And India has, so far, till date, India has never India has never really, even tacitly speaking, has ever supported the annexation, for example. But you can argue that at the end of the day, it remains muddled, because when you say territorial sovereignty, it doesn't really go to explain whose territorial sovereignty. But if you were to then attach the clause of UN Charter and international law, then obviously you're talking about Ukrainian territorial sovereignty, isn't it? Because that's what the UN Charter and international law is all about. However, I think there is a bit of strategic ambiguity that India leaves there because of obvious reasons. Because also remember that in India, there is a very strong public opinion that it is impossible to defeat Russia in its home turf. You would keep hearing it again and again. Oh, that, okay, Russia is prolonging the war and West is actually fighting to the last Ukrainian. Nobody really gets into the details of, as Professor Ghosh mentioned, about what really is the historicity, how is the war going on, what are the different battlefronts, what is happening in the Black Sea region. Why is it that India has been engaging Ukraine despite having its ties with Russia? Okay, so these kind of things are very much there. It depends on how you read between the lines. And one more thing I need to mention about, India's ties with Russia. Please remember that in my opinion, in my research, I have argued again and again that this golden period of what we referred to as India-Russia partnership and, relationship is definitely set to evolve. I mean, now Russia is no longer the most important defense partner. If you look at the data in the last 10 years, from 78%, it has already fallen down to 36%. Okay. And now you have countries like France, countries like the US, with whom you have an unprecedented, defense cooperation. And what makes the qualitative difference between these two is that on the one hand, when you look at, for example, France or for the US, you see that these defense cooperations are also entwined with a very, deep and very seriously steered cooperation on emerging and critical technology, which you don't see with Russia. So what I'm saying is that in the next coming 5 to 10 years, you will see that India will become less and less dependent for its defense procurement. And now the ties are set to evolve into energy and all of that. Okay, that's another thing. Now, when India India has upheld the UN Charter, coming back to that point, and India has condemned the killings of Bucha, for example. But there, as you can see, that India maintains a balanced stand. Whether I agree with it or not, personally, I may have a different opinion, but I do understand what the Indian state is going through, because please don't forget that India's continental security issues entail for this kind of a balancing act. Okay, so please keep that in mind. If we had time, we would probably get into the details of that, but anyway, you can always email me on that. Now, very quickly, about what lessons can India learn from Ukraine, I already mentioned, and Professor Ghosh also mentioned about the drones. Now, on the question whether Ukraine will be interested in sharing with India all the technology, I think you have to somewhere understand that I think European partners have gone out of the way to actually support India's diversification efforts, because a stronger India in the Indo-Pacific is ultimately in the interest of the Western partners. So I think somewhere there has to be a constant communication, a constant dialogue. And that is where I feel, and I gave you the data of how many times actually the Indian and the Ukrainian side have officially interacted, which never really comes to fore. And my last point is on the oil trade. I think it really needs to be, the record needs to be set straight, which is that it is not just about India getting cheap oil. Of course, India is getting cheap oil, and like any other country, India is going to go, because India is dependent on oil imports. Okay. But I have done a great deal of work on this, and I have actually analyzed that if you look at the data from Russia's Ministry of Finance, and I'm not going to Western sources, this is on Russia's Ministry of Finance. I've already written on that. I'm happy to share the link of the article. But data from Russia's Ministry of Finance actually shows that when you compare the oil and gas revenues earned in 2021, which is before the war started, these figures dropped by 65% in 2023. So Russia earned whatever, 25 point some trillion rubles, and then despite the rise in crude price and successful rerouting of all the hydrocarbons to new markets like China and Russia, China and India, the revenues have been falling. Okay, so this is a point that is often missed, because the larger point of the price cap and the oil ban was to basically check Russia's energy revenues. Okay, and in that regard, if you carefully analyze the statements made by, for example, Janet Yellen or other American statesmen, you would probably see that perhaps there was an understanding on what really India is doing, and why is it that it was accepted by the larger West to let India buy all this oil, because it was a kind of a win-win situation. And I'm not even coming to the fact that most of the payments that were made for this purchase, of course, they were done in dirhams, and they were done in, some of them were also done in yuan, but the bulk of the payments were also made in rupees, which actually are not able to get converted into ruble. I mean, this is something which is a challenge for India and Russia to tackle. So I think these kind of, when you read between the lines, you see a different kind of reality emerging, and you perhaps understand better why India maintains such a careful, I would say carefully worded response when it comes to the Russia-Ukraine war. But at the same time, and my point is that if you look carefully, I think India's stance and India's approach should be really evaluated with better lens. And all these inputs that I give you now will actually tell you that there's a lot more that is usually not really discussed, and perhaps it would be discussed much later. But not to take away from the fact that I agree with Professor Ghosh's point that we have a serious problem in understanding the historicity of the of this entire country. I mean, for example, not many people, for example, are even interested in how the East European countries and the ex-Warsaw Pact countries and the ex-Soviet countries actually lobbied for years to get into NATO and the EU. And usually there is always, and I would say that at the cost of sounding very politically incorrect, at least from India's perspective, that there is always a Western narrative in India, but there is never a Russian narrative in India. So mostly what is coming from Russia is always taken on face value versus whatever is coming from the West is always taken as a narrative which needs to be deconstructed. So on the one hand, analytically, it's a great thing, but I think that the same analytical rigor should also be applied when we are looking at Russia. And part of this dehyphenation that I was speaking about is actually going to be, somewhere helping this particular process that yes, the world is evolving, and do we have the tools to understand how and when and where is it reaching? So those were my 2 cents. Thank you.
Thank you very much for this very quick and to-the-point answers. And I would ask Dr. Bordilovska if you had to say, and then Mr. Vadim, if you have to answer to any of the questions, please. And I'll say my few cents again.
Thank you, Mridula. Actually, there was no specific question to me, but what I would like to mention here is that yeah, what you said about what is missing, right? The understanding of Russia is definitely missing. And I would like to mention it because our institute is seriously working on that, how to, to fill this gap. What is Russia? Actually, what is great Russian culture, what is Russian conduct, what are the principles of internal and external policy, and many other things. So we are really working on that. And another missing point is how to bring this knowledge and serious research to our colleagues in different points of the world and to India, of course. So the second missing point is that we're still searching for deeper collaboration with Indian think tanks and IDSA, namely Dr. Rao. We are still waiting for some kind of reply and for, I don't know, memorandum of understanding, any other collaboration, but we need to be in touch just to give more information and to get more information, because I would like to thank Dr. Rao, because she really made a great presentation, which is very useful. And thank you very much for all these facts. For example, these 40 conversations and connections, which we really did not know. This fact, so thank you. And again, it proved that we have a lack of collaboration and discussion, and we need to improve it. That's why I think today's discussion is very important, but much more needs to be done. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. Mr. Halaichuk, would you like to comment before I move on to opening the floor to oral questions? Because questions were written on the chat, but it might be also good to, yeah.
I'll make very brief comments about
excuse me. After you finish, I will give the word to Anastasia also, because she had to tell about the crude oil thing. No, you please finish then.
In fact, I wanted to make very brief comments on 2 points. First is the cooperation in the military technology. Ukraine-India cooperation has been pretty active, of course, with some disruptions after the Russian aggression. However, Indian partners have made it very clear that they are very much interested in Ukrainian technologies on improving old Soviet weaponry and on continuing purchasing Ukrainian gas turbines and many other things that are made in Ukraine with improved technologies. And so this is ongoing. Here, of course, we are being careful about passing on very sensitive technologies. But on this particular issue, we believe that cooperation is pretty effective and efficient. And here we beat the Russians. I would put it this way in terms of improving our contacts and getting more contracts. And on the oil thing, it is a very sensitive issue for us. Of course, anything which helps to finance Russia's war machine by avoiding sanctions too is sensitive to us. However, it's not only Indian partners' comments, but also from our Western allies that this crude oil trade has been interesting on many sides. On one hand, yes, there's been this great increase. However, the price, even the price, there were some instances where the price cap was capped and even lower. The prices that India got the oil for was even lower than the price cap. And the other thing, which our Western partners pointed out to us, was the fact that the oil market has been pretty saturated. India has made a lot of impact on saturating oil market, on putting a lot of oil on a world trade market, and making certain effects and influences on oil prices in general, therefore reducing Russian capabilities in terms of oil trade. So these things are very interconnected. But yes, we are aware of the delicacy of the situation, and sanction avoidance and crude oil trade is definitely going to be the points of discussion when the Prime Minister Modi's and his team come to Ukraine.
Thank you. Thank you. I would like to now ask Anastasia to make her point on the crude oil for the middle class or the rural class, please.
Yes, what I wanted to do is to make a point about the different electorates that Modi does have. I'm not dividing India into two different societies, but the results of these elections were very surprising and very prolix and complicated. And somebody at the Center for the Study of Developing Societies, which does the most refined, elaborate surveys, said there are no patterns, which is not true. There is actually one very clear pattern. It's not class or caste-wise, it's not regional, it's city, countryside divide. And basically the cities voted for the BJP and Modi overwhelmingly, and the countryside did not. So the cities, of course, use more fossil fuels and fossil fuel-derived materials than the countryside, but for the countryside, which is in a very dire situation given droughts and falling prices of agricultural products, the countryside needs these things very urgently. Right. So, of course, it is a nationwide interest, but it's also a very specific political interest. So as water levels have been dropping, farmers are having to drill deeper and deeper. In order to drill, you need fossil fuels. In order to pump, you need fossil fuels. So even though the actual amount of it used is lower, it is very much urgently needed. I think the second question that Malati asked, if I can just quickly comment on that, the mystery and sort of the embarrassment that Indian intellectuals, a lot of them indeed, have not really, it's taken them a long time to understand that this is an imperial war of conquest, that Russia isn't, that Russia is actually Europe's last conquering empire, functioning in the way that a lot of 19th century political entities did. And the end of the Second World War was supposed to put an end to that. But The problem is that again the information campaign that the Soviet Union has run, which has conflated Russia and the Soviet Union. So Russia stands for the Soviet Union in many people's minds, and many people, for instance, don't know that, of course, Ukraine was one of the creators, one of the signatories of the Soviet Creating Act in 1922, and that the famous phrase that the slogan that everybody quotes in India, Rusi Bharatiya Bhai Bhai, or Hindi Rusi Bhai Bhai.
Hindi Bhai Bhai.
Well, it was originally Hindi Rusi Bhai Bhai, right? Many iterations of that was coined by Khrushchev, who was Ukrainian, and that relations between India and the Soviet Union actually blossomed under its Ukrainian leaders. So in that sense, there is a lot of history to be learned, but the left, the Indian left, which of course dominates intellectual academic spheres, has been has learned to think that the USSR is a champion of post-colonial and colonial nations, and then post-colonial nations, that it is an enemy of the imperial West, and the very simple syllogism that one's enemy's enemy isn't necessarily one's friend is very slow to develop in those circles. But it is also a problem of the global left, not only of the Indian intellectual circles.
Thank you very much for speaking about the left, because the left, the ideas of the leftists dominate here in understanding Soviet and of course the mixing of Soviet and Russian, and the Russian imperialism, which is here we have coined the term recolonizing Ukraine. It is trying to recolonize. Ukraine left the colony in 1991, if we say that. Even during the Soviet days, it was a different entity in its present borders. So that is also there. Please, I request everyone to just raise the hand and represent yourself and ask questions more if you have, please. Or you put all your questions in written, and nobody has any questions, or I'm still to not notice somebody. Yeah. Well, I will hope that there are no questions, and therefore I will ask Mr. Halaichuk to say his vote of thanks for this event. Please.
Will do so happily. Thank you, Mridula, again for organizing, making this possible. Thank you, all our dear speakers. Some of you I have met today, and I definitely hope that we will stay in touch. Very insightful, very useful information, and it shows that it's very helpful to have these discussions with people from different countries, different experiences, having the input which helps us all to understand better and to make better plans. We all excited about the visit. We, quite frankly, as we discussed here, we understand it's not going to bring us the answer to the question of how the Russian war against Ukraine should be ended, but it will definitely help us to understand better what it is that we can do better, what it is that we can do more to approach that moment, and to also use this opportunity to spread the word around the world. And India definitely has that possibility to help us spread the word about the Ukrainian position, about the Ukrainian desires, and the Ukrainian vision of the future. Ukraine, the candidate country for the European Union, and as we know, this visit also includes the Poland and maybe other countries that would help to also build up this European project vision better. What it is, what are India's interests in the European continent, and how Ukraine can play a very, very important role in helping the European project to be more successful, and Europe, India, Ukraine cooperation more efficient. So thank you, everyone, all the participants, for your wonderful questions. I'm sorry, couldn't answer directly some of those, but I believe I've provided the explanation why. And let's try do something post-visit and see how our expectations and predictions worked or didn't work, and what it is that we need to do more. Thank you.
Thank you. I would just add, thank you so much for thanking everybody. Okay, I would just say that we will not end here. It will be a continuation. I believe the honorable panelists will also be with us. And I do believe also that, you know, someone asked if there will be a video and it will be uploaded. Yes, it will be. But you can feel the difference of just watching the video and being here participating. There's a big difference. So please tell friends that it's not enough to watch the video. Involve them to come. And for that, we will have a session after the visit. It can be close to the 3rd of September, between 30th and 3rd. We will keep you informed. You are all on our mailing list. And also, I want to make a small announcement that we will have a session on the 25th, a small session with activists and students who have participated in the Bangladesh revolution that took place these days. So I would love anyone wanting to think of the grassroots perception, you know, let them speak, let them tell us what really happened. So it's from the first-hand grassroots perspective that we would come to know. Ukrainians know very less. So I'm trying to involve students because the whole scenario of Bangladesh, believe me, when I saw the optics, the photos, it resembles Maidan. It resembles the Maidan. And if we meet on 25th, you will be able to see why and how and why I'm telling this, because it is absolutely very similar. We are facing the subcontinent through a lot of other issues. In my state, there is a very big problem after the murder of a doctor, lady doctor. So there's a big ladies movement in my state and other places. So there is a big, well, I would not really agree with you writing China Maidan. No, I'm not so sure about China's role here because it's still early to say. It's still early to say. One of the things that is the cornerstone of this Bangladesh thing is another, that, you know, we Indians, we should not look at Bangladesh. We should look at Bangladesh from their point of view. You know, we have our point of view, but we should not impose. Another thing is that, you know, if not we dominating, then somebody else is dominating. This might not be the case. Anyway, let's postpone this discussion till 25th. I hope people interested, you will participate, but post-visit, we will definitely have another discussion, and I hope that all the panelists involved might also be able to monitor and say, refine, or consolidate whatever they have said. Did they meet the expectations? Did the visit meet their expectations? It will still be early, but let's see. Okay, thank you so much for being with us, all of you. So we will look forward to our meeting in 2 weeks, and next week will be the Bangladesh. Thank you so much.
Thanks, Mridula.
Thank you. Thank you.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Yeah.